A few months back, I had an exclusive first look at the new Tesla Model Y, but I didn't actually have the chance to drive it up until now because I've got it in for review. Now, at the time of filming and in the UK, it's available in three trims. You've got the rear-wheel drive coming in at £45,000, the long-range rear-wheel drive that comes in at £49,000, and then the long-range all-wheel drive at £52,000. There's also the launch edition model, which you actually have on review, that comes in at roughly £60,000 to £61,000, although that's effectively the long-range all-wheel drive with a few extra goodies thrown in. Now, I would just like to point out that I'm not endorsed by Tesla. I don't really mind who the CEO is, and I certainly don't care about US politics. What does bother me is to see if this vehicle is worth its price tag, how it compares to the outgoing Tesla Model Y, and of course some of its key competitors. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So let's kick things off and talk about its electric range. And here, kind of unsurprisingly, Tesla has still not shared the battery pack capacity of its new generation vehicles. It is touted to be over 82 kilowatt hour, but nonetheless what they have shared is the fact that you have got a heat pump that comes included as standard across the entire trim range, which is certainly appreciated for those colder climate scenarios. In other words, it uses heat that's dissipated from the vehicle's electronics, namely for example the battery pack, and feeds it into the cabin in a safe way in order to heat it, therefore adding to the overall efficiency. You have also got a WLTP claim of 311 miles for the rear-wheel drive vehicle, 384 miles for the long-range rear-wheel drive, and 367 miles for the long-range all-wheel drive. Now, I am actually testing the launch edition model, as I pointed out before, and that's very much similar to the long-range all-wheel drive, although it has got the 20-inch Helix 2.0 wheels fitted, which have got lower claimed range of roughly 11 miles in comparison to the standard 19-inch cross-flow wheels. Now, from my mixed driving test using the 20-inch alloys, I netted a very impressive 275 to 295 miles. Had I been on the 19-inch cross-flow wheels, I would have expected to get roughly 10 miles more in my mixed driving test, which also includes driving on the country roads, in the city, and also on the motorway. Now, as you'll be able to see from the mileage leaderboard, it actually does fare very well, not only in comparison to the older generation model, but also in comparison to the vast majority of its competitors. Now, in case you're wondering, I would expect to get roughly 305 to 325 miles in the long-range rear-wheel drive and roughly 235 to 255 miles in the entry-level rear-wheel drive. So yes, indeed, the new generation models are very similar in terms of performance to the older generation models, but marginally better in certain scenarios. Now, it goes without saying that you can replenish its battery pack at a much more rapid rate by plugging it in. And here it's fantastic that you have got Tesla's supercharger network, which is also integrated via the infotainment system. This allows for fantastic route planning and really takes away from range anxiety, because you don't have to be looking around for a charger on a certain app, and you can just simply rely on the Tesla. Furthermore, it will also give you an indication of your driving style and also therefore calculate the amount of range that you'll have remaining when you approach a certain destination. Now, in terms of the charging speed via the CCS port, the entry-level rear-wheel drive vehicle will take up to 175 kilowatts, while the long-range models will take up to 250 kilowatts. Nonetheless, over here, all the models will go to roughly 10 to 80% in around half an hour, whereas the long-range models connected up to a V2 supercharger, in other words, capped to 150 kilowatts instead, will take you roughly 40 minutes. Now, when connected up to a non-Tesla supercharger, for example, a 50 kilowatt DC charger that you'll find on the motorway, you can attain the same level of charge in roughly 1 to 2 hours. Now, in terms of its Type 2 port, you have got an 11 kilowatt onboard charger, and therefore means that you go from 0 to 100% in roughly 7 to 9 hours. However, if you're going to be using a regular home wall box, and therefore capped at roughly 7 kilowatts, it will take you 11 to 13 hours to attain 0 to 100% charge. As for a 3-pin input, it's going to take you in excess of 35 hours. Aside from its electric range, another thing that's been updated from the outgoing model is a suspension system. And believe it or not, Tesla have fitted an even firmer setup, which I didn't actually think was something that I was going to be saying in the updated model, because the older generation model received some flack for that very reason. And in this respect, it does mean that when it comes to going around winding country routes, the vehicle feels even more planted. There's even less body lean to worry about, which is actually quite surprising for an electric SUV. Equally, when it comes to going on those longer motorway drives, it feels just a little bit more steady. However, it's not to say that when it comes to driving in and around town, it's actually really rock hard. Far from it. When it comes to dealing with singular speed bumps or potholes, the improved dampening tech which has come from the new Model 3 actually does do a pretty good job. With that said, I did find that when it came to dealing with more challenging routes, for example, when there's multiple speed bumps and potholes, or indeed uneven terrain, for example, on country roads, then the vehicle just felt a bit too jittery for my liking, which is actually quite a shame. I would have actually loved if the manufacturer had fitted the adaptive suspension system like you'd find on the Model S or the Model 3 Performance, or indeed slightly something that was a bit softer on the road, therefore catering for families. Now, aside from all of this, I would like to point out that when it comes to the overall utmost driver's feel, it can't quite compete with the likes of Porsche or indeed Audi. But nonetheless, I think a lot of consumers will actually be pleasantly surprised. You've got a decent connection with the front axle, and given the fact that you can also adjust the firmness of the steering wheel via the infotainment system, it gives you a good degree of control depending on the routes that you're actually faced with. Where the Tesla can compete and somewhat excel in comparison to some of the more premium offerings is in terms of raw straight line speeds. Now, there's no performance data that's been shared by the manufacturer, so I don't have any sort of kilowatt or horsepower or Newton meter claim from the manufacturer. However, there is a 0 to 60 time for all the different models that are currently available. The entry rear-wheel drive model will go from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 5.6 seconds. The long-range rear-wheel drive sits at 5.4 seconds, while the long-range all-wheel drive sits at just 4.6 seconds. Now, it's worth highlighting over here that the vehicle on review is the launch edition, and it has also got the acceleration boost, therefore taking its claimed 0 to 60 time down to just 4.1 seconds. Now, using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch, I had it tested from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 1.31 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 1.97 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 4.11 seconds, so yes, pretty much bang on to the manufacturer's claim, 50 to 70 miles an hour in 1.72 seconds, and a peak acceleration of 0.7 G. The vehicle actually feels pretty powerful to say the least, and will send your head flying back to the headrest. As for its top speed, it's electronically limited to 125 miles an hour. So next up we get onto its interior design, and here I really do love what the manufacturer has achieved within the new Tesla Model Y, because there's a bit more of a refinement over the outgoing model. You've got a wraparound LED strip that can be customized via the infotainment system, better use of materials, namely with more Alcantara that can be found towards the door trims and also the dashboard, all while the headliner and the upholstery and the stitching work are all very similar and quite nice. Speaking of which, over here, it is available in an all-black interior. If, however, you want a white finish instead, it'll cost you an additional £1,100. Now, unfortunately, you still do not have an instrument cluster or head-up display. This is very much the case with the outgoing Tesla Model Y and the new Tesla Model 3, but it would have very much been appreciated because it allows you to keep your eyes planted on the road and gives you even more information than you require. For example, if you want to be looking at the speedometer, instead of glancing towards the center of the dashboard, and indeed at the top right-hand side, at least for those of us who are driving a right-hand drive vehicle, it would have been better if it was projected straight in front of you. What is present, however, is an indicator stalk. Now, I'm highlighting this because in the new Tesla Model 3, the X and the S, you no longer have an indicator stalk, which I feel is a safety concern. Thankfully, the manufacturer has included it within the new Tesla Model Y. This makes it far more practical when you're going around roundabouts, for example, for those of us who live in Europe or in the UK, and just adds to the overall convenience than having to press a button on a steering wheel. Some people disagreed with me, but in my opinion, and from my vast experience of reviewing different vehicles, I just feel an indicator stalk and the omission of it was a bit of a step too far, and therefore having it re-included now in a Tesla Model Y is very much appreciated. Now, for you to have a drive mode selector, because the stalk has actually been removed, it's all done via the infotainment system. Indeed, over here you can swipe up to go into drive, swipe down to go into reverse, and tap to park. It's actually quite intuitive while you get your head around it, and given the placement is actually quite close to the steering wheel, it becomes second nature. Now, in case you're wondering if the screen were to ever fail, you have got a manual overdrive as such, and that can be found via the headliner where you've got those basic functions, so therefore allowing you to drive to a Tesla service center in order to get the screen repaired or indeed replaced. Now, as for the infotainment system, you've got a 15.4-inch landscape display. It's a shame that in comparison to some of its competitors, it doesn't rotate, for example, towards the driver or the passenger. Nonetheless, the display itself is super responsive and among one of the best out there on the market. Not only in terms of the amount of entertainment apps that you have got, but also the fact that it also integrates Google Maps directly via the system and therefore can read the state of charge, allowing you for fantastic route planning, as I did mention before, via the supercharger network. Now, despite all of its competencies, it still does not support Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, which in my opinion can be a deal breaker for certain individuals that just like using their favorite apps that can be found on their smartphone, or just have the convenience of having all their points of interest rather than having to reinitiate them via the Tesla infotainment system. Small point to make, but it would have very much been appreciated given the fact that all the rival alternatives offer these third-party mobile operating systems. Now, this does actually lead me on to audio reproduction, because for you to actually get the utmost audio fidelity, you'll want to use one of the streaming apps, or you can actually plug in a flash drive and have high quality audio files played back directly via that. If, however, you have locally stored music on your phone, then you'll have to resort to using Bluetooth only, which is not exactly the best scenario. Nonetheless, over here, you have actually got an upgraded audio configuration, because in the rear-wheel drive model, you've now got 9 speakers, and in the all-wheel drive models, you've actually got 16 speakers. I will say that in a nutshell, the 16-speaker audio configuration is one of the best in its class, not only in terms of an electric SUV, but just generally when it comes to other SUVs out there on the market. I think Tesla have done a stonkingly good job and upgraded it from the older generation 14-speaker audio system that in itself was class leading. In fact, if you want a detailed audio breakdown of the system that's found within the Model Y and also the in-cabin measurements, make sure you check out my detailed audio review that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down the description below or the pinned comments. Now, continuing on the subject of technology, I would like to point out that you've got the Tesla app, which is actually really comprehensively laid out and provides you plenty of options, such as remote climate controls and also the ability to check on your vehicle from afar using Sentry mode. Very handy tools indeed, and I do think it's one of the best apps out there, at least when it comes to a vehicle. So next up we get onto storage, and here it's actually pretty good within the cabin. First off, you've got the glove box, which is electronically released and also has a pin that can be set to give you that extra layer of security. Here you'll find a USB Type-A port, which is used for your dash cam or your high-res audio files. Then, towards the center console, you have got 2 wireless charging bays, and they're actually pretty fast, and furthermore are lined in fabric, so therefore means that it feels a little bit more premium and prevents your phone from rattling about or indeed sliding about too much. Then further down, you have got a large area which can be concealed, and you'll also find a non-slip material all the way at the bottom, plus a 12-volt socket. Then you have also got 2 cup holders, and then you have got the center armrest storage, which has also been lined in fabric, therefore preventing your loose change or keys from rattling about. Here you also find a 65-watt wired USB Type-C port. You'll also find 2 USB Type-C ports at the rear of the center console for the rear passengers. In terms of the door bins, the front 2 have been lined in fabric and will accommodate a 500ml bottle with ease alongside some small to medium-sized valuables. The rear 2 are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited, but it's also great to see over here that they have been also lined in fabric. This is not the case with a lot of its competitors and therefore adds to the overall class within the vehicle. Then you've also got a pull-down armrest compartment which reveals 2 cup holders. Now, of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot, and here you've got an estimated 850 litres to play around with an official claim of 2,138 litres when you drop down the seats. Yes, indeed, it's actually plentiful and among one of the largest capacities that you'll find in a fully electric SUV. Furthermore, it's very practical. You have got a hatchback design, and for someone who's just under 6 foot, I had no problems whatsoever when it came to accessing the boot. It also has got an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard across the entire trim range, and also a hands-free operation, which is a new thing that's come in with this updated Model Y. Furthermore, you have got a flat loading bay and 60/40 power folding rear seats. Yes, indeed, these seats are no longer just electronically released, but have got that power folding function, which does also have its benefits for the rear occupants, which I'll be touching upon very shortly, but in this respect means that you can drop them from the rear seats, the front seats, and also from the boot. So yes, the manufacturer has thought of different ways that you can actually operate the power seats, and this actually gives it a bit more of an extra touch in comparison to some of its competitors, which will normally have a manual release only. Elsewhere, you have got a humongous underfloor compartment, and this will certainly cater for your charging cables. Better still, the manufacturer has also provided you a tri-folding boot load cover, and therefore means it can also conveniently fit within the underfloor compartment. Now, you have also got a pretty large frunk, and it's estimated to be sitting at roughly 117 litres like its sibling. And this is actually very convenient for also taking your charging cables, or indeed certain goods that you might not frequently access. The reason I mention this is because the frunk is actually electronically released, but will have to be manually closed, therefore making it a little less convenient in comparison to accessing the boot. So what about when it comes to those seats that I talked about? Well, first off, I would like to say that at the front of the cabin, they're very accommodating and soft. In fact, I feel they're a little bit softer in comparison to the previous generation models. I had no issues whatsoever when it came to doing my driving tests. Furthermore, they're electronically operated, heated and ventilated as standard across the entire trim range. And the same could be said about the steering wheel, which is also heated. That's very much not the case with the vast majority of its competitors, and therefore you're getting better value for money, at least on the Tesla. Now, as for the rear outer seats, they're also heated. And yes, that is also included as standard. Now, in terms of the power folding function, you can actually fold the seats directly via the infotainment system or via a button that's found just beside the rear seats and towards the door. Now here, you might want to do that, for example, if you want to drop down the seats and you're sat at the back, and more importantly, can use it as a reclining function. I'm not really sure why you'd want to bring it more of a 90-degree angle, but the option is there for you to use. I actually found it most comfortable when the seats were fully reclined. On that note, when it came to headroom and legroom, it's absolutely flawless. It's great to see here that the manufacturer has optimized the rear footwell design, and even for the rear middle occupant, where there's actually a little bit of a cutout within the center console to give you a little bit of that extra bit of legroom. It is worth pointing out over here that I'm just under 6 foot and I had no issues whatsoever, and therefore you're not going to have any sort of problems if you have any kids or indeed adults at the back. Another thing that makes it stand out over its competitors is the panoramic glass roof. And yes, that's included as standard yet again across the entire trim range. It's very much appreciated, and it also has got UV protection built in. Elsewhere, you've also got an 8-inch rear touchscreen display. Not only does this serve a purpose, in other words to adjust the climate controls, but you can also use it for multimedia consumption. In fact, you can even pair up a set of earphones or headphones directly to the rear display, therefore giving you some separation from the front of the cabin. Very handy if you have any sort of teenagers or kids who are sat at the back, and therefore allows them to be a bit more entertained on those longer drives. Now, another thing I thought I should point out and highlight for those people who are potentially new to Tesla vehicles is that getting out of the vehicle does actually feel pretty intuitive, because you've got an electronic door release, and this just becomes a lot easier to just open the door. You have also got a manual release lever in case you want it for an emergency situation. And in case you're wondering, no, you cannot open the doors electronically while you're on the move, so you don't have to worry about your kids pressing the button and then exiting the vehicle accidentally. Now, in terms of getting into the vehicle, however, it does actually feel a little bit counterintuitive just due to how the door handles are designed and within the shell of the vehicle. Once you do get your head around its design, then it does become second nature. With that said, it is a shame that there is no sort of LED lights, therefore indicating where the door handles are, and if you're approaching the vehicle in a completely pitch black scenario, then it can sometimes be hard to actually find the door handle itself, other than relying on muscle memory. Another thing I would also like to highlight is the fact that there is a pressure sensor that's found within the driver's seat. In fact, Tesla have been doing this for quite a while, and a lot of other manufacturers have adopted the same sort of technique. And while it's very much appreciated if you're a single occupant, if you've got other people who are sat within the cabin, and then, for example, the driver leaves, the vehicle will automatically power down. Thankfully, there's a way of easily overwriting this by tapping on the infotainment system at the front or at the back. And this therefore will allow you to have your multimedia apps or indeed the climate controls to still be in operation. With that said, this vehicle that was on test did seem to have a few issues. In other words, when I was sat in the passenger seat or at the back and initiating the vehicle, it would automatically power on and then power off shortly after. I'm not really sure if it was a software glitch or a potential problem with the vehicle on review, but I just thought to share my findings in this review. Next up, we get onto the exterior design. I'll be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. Subjectively, I really do love the new Tesla Model Y because it's been inspired by the Robotaxi and the Cybertruck, and you can see this pretty evidently from the frontal profile due to the headlights stretching the entire width of the vehicle. Then you've also got these pretty nice aggressive lines that stretch from the front all the way to the back. Speaking of which, over here towards the side you have got 19 to 20 inch wheels, with the latter actually being pictured, and while you don't have body coloured wheel arches or side skirts, they're actually relatively thin and don't protrude at all. At the back you've got this light bar, which is actually really nice. There's the lights that are actually projected onto the vehicle itself, therefore making it stand out over some rival alternatives. You then also have the kind of L-shaped tail lights, which is pretty much the same that you would find on the new Tesla Model 3. The little integrated spoiler as well gives it a little bit of that extra sportier flair. Frankly, over here, when it comes to its overall exterior design, I think Tesla have absolutely nailed it. In terms of the overall colours, it's available in stealth grey as standard. However, if you want a white, black or blue finish, it'll cost you an additional £1,300. If, however, you want ultra red or the pictured quicksilver, which I actually do quite like, it'll set you back a whopping £2,600. I would also like to highlight that the vehicle has a towing capacity that's rated at up to 1,600 kilograms. Another thing that goes hand in hand with exterior design is crash safety. And here the updated Model Y was not tested by Euro NCAP, at least not at the time of filming. However, if the older generation model is anything to go by, you're not going to have any sort of worries. See here, it was tested in 2022, awarded a full 5 out of 5 stars, or more specifically, a whopping 97% in adult occupancy, 87% in child occupancy, and a class-leading 98% in its safety assist scores. Indeed, it does actually do a tremendous job across the board. Now, as for the driver assistance systems, the updated model is very much similar to the outgoing one. Here you've got auto emergency braking, forward collision warning, lane departure avoidance, blind spot collision warning, which will appear via the infotainment system, and you will also be able to see the camera-based system be initiated, which is a really nice handy inclusion. And you then also have a blind spot monitoring system, which will also appear within the mirror triangles. And then you have got traffic aware cruise control and auto steer. All of these, as a reminder, do actually come included as standard across the entire trim range, which is very much appreciated. Now, auto steer will give you steering support on the motorway and will work with the likes of autopilot. And when it comes to the actual traffic aware cruise control, it does a great job of keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle, and it also gives you stop and go technology, therefore taking away the stress on those more mundane trips. Now, you can also better the experience by going for the enhanced autopilot package at £3,400, and this will give you lane change assist and overtaking assist with auto park and smart summon. If you want to go a step further, you can go for the full self-driving package, FSD for short, at £6,800. This will effectively give you traffic light and stop sign control and put you at the forefront of self-driving technology. Although I do think that in this day and age, and within the UK and EU due to regulations, the FSD package is not really worth it. And while the enhanced autopilot might be handy in certain scenarios, but I don't think it's something that a lot of people will actually go towards, at least given the fact that the regular package is actually pretty comprehensive. Now finally, I would like to talk about parking and visibility, and at the front it's actually excellent. Due to the design of the bonnet, it almost looks non-existent. Although it's worth pointing out over here that the A-pillars are actually pretty chunky, therefore making them a little bit obstructive when it comes to going around bends or, for example, on a roundabout. As for the side, it's actually pretty good, while at the rear it is a little bit limited just due to its sloped profile. Thankfully, however, you have got cameras that are positioned all the way around the vehicle. They're giving you a full 360 view of the vehicle itself. There are also high-resolution cameras that can be accessed at any point via the button that's found on the steering wheel, therefore making it quite accessible, be it if you're going to be within a parking space or, of course, if you just want to see your cameras while you're on a drive. Now here, this does bring me onto Tesla Vision. For those people who might not be aware, Tesla got rid of the ultrasonic sensors like you'd find on a lot of other vehicles out there that have been produced for multiple decades. And this means that it's relying on the camera-based system to give you an indication of your surroundings. And in principle, it does actually work pretty well, as it's been updated over time, and therefore firmware has effectively made it a lot better. However, I still do find that in certain scenarios, it does get a little bit confused, and therefore might say that there's an object in front of you when there really isn't. Namely, for example, when it comes to any sort of vegetation. It would have been great if Tesla had paired up Tesla Vision and the ultrasonic sensors to give you the utmost sense of confidence. Now, aside from all this, it's also great to see that you have got a built-in dashcam feature. And this is just due to the fact that you've got those high-resolution cameras that are dotted around the vehicle. Furthermore, you've got something called Sentry Mode, which will effectively initiate the cameras at any given point by your control, or indeed will do it automatically upon any sort of action. For example, if someone's a bit too close to your vehicle or indeed accidentally hits it, you'll actually have video evidence of this, which can be used, for example, for insurance purposes. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the new Tesla Model Y, and it's effectively a refinement over the older generation model, providing better exterior and interior design, better features such as the use of the 8-inch touchscreen at the back, power folding rear seats, and the additional audio drivers. More importantly, you have got a slightly different suspension setup, be it good or bad, depending on where you sit on that, and of course better efficiency, therefore meaning that you have got longer electric range. Given all of this, and of course given its overall price tag, comparing it to some of its key competitors, it definitely is a fantastic electric SUV and one that you should certainly consider. As a result, it gets our Best Buy award. Now I'd be curious to know what you make of the new Tesla Model Y down in the comment section below, and how you feel it compares to some of its competitors, including its older sibling. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.